Okay, welcome to the second day of our board meeting. We had good discussions yesterday in the closed session at the end, and then a nice dinner. Um, we were receiving several reports yesterday, so just to say that we received also an IAB written report, and it will be in the minutes, and the trustees you have it in the book. So I mean you have already read it, but anyway, for completeness. So as I said yesterday we spent time looking into the action plan for 2019 and the status and what's going on there. And at the same time, as Andrew will present shortly, staff has been working very hard on the action plan for 2020. And as we said yesterday, we've been reaching out to the different communities, and it's been also a bottom-up approach to come up with everything. So we are actually quite excited to see the results and the presentation. So we will basically be, as usual, presenting the general action plan in the open session. Then Sandy, our CFO, will present the budget in the closed session, and then we will resume in open session as well. So with that, Andrew, you have the presentation.
I do. I'm trying to find one of the 9 million windows I've got open here. So helpful. Bug me again. So, good day, everyone. Come on, now. Sorry, I need to have a local copy of it here. I can't.
Yeah.
Because I can't really see it from here. So thank you for taking the time. Obviously, I mean, you all have to, but for the rest of the audience, for taking the time to have a look at this. This is a description of the plan for 2020. You've all you've all seen the text that goes with this, so obviously we're not going to go through that in detail. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the highlights. Assuming that you approve this and the budget that's associated with it, we will post this on the website later today. Next, please. So as you know, our vision is that the internet is for everyone, and this is the guiding principle behind this plan for next year. The plan is fundamentally based upon the mission and the vision. The way that we've been structuring the discussions over the course of the year we have attempted to take those as the critical guiding posts for what we've been doing, and everything that we have been working on is guided by that central idea. But those are lofty statements, and what we've tried to do is make some things that are a little more concrete. Next, please. So the basic idea here is that just as we talked about last year, we have an open, globally connected, secure, and trustworthy internet as the thing that we're trying to reach. These are strategic goals, the things that the Internet Society is trying to achieve. And the way that we boiled this down over the course of the last year was to say, what we are trying to do is build, promote, and defend the global network of networks. That's the thing that we're working on, the specific targets that we're aiming to achieve. So what we're trying to do here is make this a reality, and the way we've done that is to organize this into thinking about making the internet bigger on the one hand, and on the other hand, making the internet stronger. So these pieces all fit together. You can understand that if you're trying to make the internet bigger, or you're trying to make it stronger, that contributes to the idea that we will build, promote, and defend the global network of networks, and ultimately that leads us to our vision: the internet is for everyone. Next, please. In order to do this, we broke out a number of things, and you have seen some of this in a presentation that I made to you previously. The fundamental idea here is that when we talk about we're going to build the internet, what we're going to do is we're going to extend the internet to communities that do not have it and need it most. Now, I admit that need it most and do not have it are both things that we need to define precisely. That's part of the part of the work of the staff. Because what that implies is that we're going to take our limited resources and we're going to apply them in some cases, and we're not going to apply them in other cases. That's the purpose of having these filters, is to be able to say, this is the target that we need to meet. We're going to promote the internet. We're going to promote the internet model of networking as the preferred model. It's been interesting to me that when we've presented this, some people have said, well, what is the internet model of networking? Which I thought nicely showed what the problem is, right? Because if we have the Internet Society members and staff not entirely sure what the internet model of networking is, we are in a deep, deep hole, and we need to solve that problem. We need to get out of it. We need people to understand that the network of networks is the way that we build this stuff. We do it that way because you get a better system out of it. We want to convince key governments of the world to adopt policies that favor the internet model and improve internet connectivity. Now, you might say, well, how do you decide who key governments are? Well, this is, an alliance we're building. And so sometimes what that means is there are people that we think can come along with us and magnify our voice in certain places. In other cases, it's governments that we think are influencers in a given region who are very far from our position. There's lots of ways in which being a key government turns out to be true, and it really depends on the particular activity that you're undertaking. But all of this is an attempt to get people to believe that the internet model is the right way. We're going to promote the deployment of technologies and protocols that secure the interconnection of independent networks. That interconnection of independent networks is really, really critical here. There are lots of things that you could secure, but the critical thing here is that we're the internet society, not like the networking society in general. It's really about the internet. Similarly, we want to defend the internet. We need to shape the policies of these key governments, the same conditions apply, in favor of the growth of independent networks which are free to interconnect. Once again, the internet model stands out here as the central goal. We need to counter attempts by key governments to undermine encryption. Why do we need to do that? Because you can't actually build the network of networks without that kind of technology. We need to defend against shutdowns by increasing cross-border connectivity and resiliency. The goal here is not to, tell people, oh, you're bad or wrong because you're shutting things down. Governments can make decisions about that. They're sovereign entities. But we believe that the internet model is the better one. It's better for them, and we want to show them why that is the case. That's the pitch that we're trying to make. Next, please. Now, the way we want to do this year is an overriding focus on projects. One of the difficulties that we've had in the past is that we have not focused on specific, achievable things that we're going to do. And I think that isn't, in fact, always been true of the Internet Society staff. Actually, a lot of the time people are focused on those projects, but it doesn't come across clearly in the way we describe what we're doing. So this year, we are making the projects the central focus of the way we talk about this. And that project then, the projects all come with specific, identifiable goals that we can measure. And that way we can say all of the time, here is the way that we are building, promoting, and defending the internet. That's really the goal here. It makes us transparent to you, it makes us transparent to our entire community, and it makes it possible for us to know, hey, are we moving along the path that we think we want to? So that is really fundamentally the idea. But the other thing about it is that, sometimes the Internet Society has been a little fuzzy in in the way that it works. We've been a little bit, we've been trying to be influential, but it hasn't been clear exactly how that influence plays out. And so what I want to do is make sure that we have these concrete things so that people can say, hey, those people are getting things done. Let's go along with them. It's not intended to say that anything that, is not specifically measurable is useless. It's not. There's lots of stuff that you have to do that is not easily quantifiably measurable, and it's important work. But if you can convince people that these specific measures are important things to expand the internet, to make it grow, to build it and promote it and defend it, then people will start to say, these are people that we want to come along. So this is part of the diversification strategy that we've talked about before, because I believe that if we can achieve this kind of reputation, then we can attract more members who want to contribute to us, more partners who want to work with us, and so on. And so that's part of the scaling up of the funding, because we've announced this transaction and so on, but continues to be, an amount of money that is not the most in the world. It's significant. It's not. It's really valuable, and we can do a lot with that. But if we could attract more partners and we could attract more people to work with us, we could do more. We can do more together. And that really is how we can exert this stronger influence on the internet. Next, please. This is a bit of a complicated diagram, but the basic idea here is that it allows you to see that the principles of building, promoting, and defending the internet turn out to break down rather nicely into two big buckets, which is making the internet bigger, making the internet stronger, internet growth, and stronger internet. And underneath those, you can see by color coding, we've classified the projects that we're going to tackle this year. This isn't to say that these are all the things we're ever going to do, but this year, these are the ones that we're going to focus on. So as you can see here, there are 8 of them in the end. There were 9 candidates, and in the end, we selected 8 of those. So that's basically the fundamental model of how we build these things. Next, please. This is a sort of conceptual map in order to think about how we define and measure the effectiveness. And this is true for both the project and the organization. So you have at the top of this diagram, the sort of least concrete things, the vision, the mission, the strategic goals, the focus areas, and so on. Through the projects, as you go down the diagram, in the very faint green on the right there, should have tried to project these before I projected them to all of you. I apologize. The operational definitions give us definitions of how these projects result in effects in the world. And then, of course, we have individual strategic plans that each member of the staff can talk about for what it is that they're going to do this year. And that allows them also to have a clear idea of how it is that they're contributing to these things and so on. So the basic principle carries all the way across the organization. Next, please. And after that. So we're going to talk now about the particular projects. The first one of these is promoting the internet way of networking. And the reason that that we're listing this one first is because this is one that we think is most important and conceptual. We need to remind people that the technical properties of the internet are both a choice about how we design the thing and also a technical fact that we have to live with. There are choices that have been made, 20, 30 years ago about the way the internet is designed. And those are things that we need to live with. Just as, if you look around, there are cars, and cars have made facts about the way the world is. There are roads and all the rest of that. 100 years ago, this city didn't look anything like this. And the reason for that is because there's a technology that has changed the world. The internet has changed the world, and we need to remind people that it's not infinitely plastic. There are choices that are embedded in it, and some of those choices are really to our benefit. That's the other piece about this. We need to get people to support the internet way of networking because they're forgetting it. We're seeing, it used to be that we worried about unfriendly governments who thought that the internet, was going to attack their way of governing or so on. Now we have governments that you never would have thought that the internet was a problem, and they're attacking the model. And it's partly because we're not defending it very effectively. We haven't told the story about why this model makes a reliable system out of unreliable parts. It is a valuable system for all of humanity, and we need to make that much clearer. I think that this is a central focus of the staff this year. In order to make sure that we're responding to this effectively, we're going to test this approach in the context of specific legislation. So there's a bunch of legislation that's being worked on in various jurisdictions. We haven't selected exactly which ones we're going to work on, but you can imagine, it's not very hard to figure out the kinds of things that we're looking at. Some of these are pieces of quasi legislation efforts in standards bodies and so on, where we discover, hey, people are trying to redesign this thing in order to be a centralizing technology. So we're going to have to press back against that. That is the central focus of this effort. Next, please. We're going to work on encryption. there are lots of people who are working on encryption in various ways. They're working on it in, from particular points of view. There are a lot of people who are worried about it from the point of view of human rights. There are a lot of people who are worried about it from the point of view of just making it easier to deploy and so on. What we want to do is the broad story, the wide engagement about this. A way to think about this is that the opponents of ubiquitous encryption technology have many seasons of dramatic television shows like to say, oh well, we got to stop the terrorists and the baby killers, and what we have is an independent Canadian production, and we need to increase the sort of production values of this story. We need people to understand that the choice is not between safety and privacy. The choice is between one kind of safety and another kind of safety. We need to convince people that the safety of individuals really fundamentally depends upon this technology. We need governments to understand that when they undermine this stuff, they are threatening their ability to operate, their citizens' ability to protect themselves, and the entire banking system of the world. That seems like the sort of thing we ought to be able to say convincingly. And so far, our story has been a little bit confused and not always as focused as we need it to be. So that's the reason for this focus. And of course, we're going to work with other people on this. This is not a job that can be solved by any one organization, and it certainly isn't a job that we can do alone. We need all of these other organizations to be working together with us, and we need to be working together with them in order to make sure that this is a story that carries forward. Next, please. We're going to continue to work on manners. I mentioned yesterday that sometimes the Manners Project doesn't look like it's doing so much because things are getting better, and so you hear about it less and less. That's a success, and we need to build upon that and make that community effective and sustainable and so on. And therefore, we're going to continue to work on this. In particular, we're going to make sure that observatory is a production service, and make sure that we're going to double the Manners membership, but in targeted ways. We need organizations like CDNs, Content Delivery Networks, to join this effort, because that's how routing is going to get better on the internet. And the routing problems attack the infrastructure. They attack the internet model, the internet way of networking. And so we need to fix this problem. We need to address this problem in order that the people who have an alternative model, the centralized model, don't have a good argument. So we absolutely need this. This is the way the projects fit together and support one another. Next, please. For the same reason, we're going to focus on time security. This is, I will grant, a rather small project. It's quite focused. But look, if we're going to be talking seriously to people and saying, you need encryption, it needs to be ubiquitous and all the rest of it, then we need to have reliable time. And the reason we need to is because all of the encryption depends on accurate clocks. So we can't leave open and just ignore the fact that currently this is a fundamental problem. So we got to work on it. And this is the kind of technical thing that the Internet Society is ideally poised to address, because basically market solutions are never going to work for this. This is a first mover problem in exactly the same way that BCP38 was. And so what we've got to do is figure out how we can move people along the line towards doing this. Those kind of market failure things are places where the Internet Society ought to use its resources in order to improve the technology. Next, please. We have to refresh a bunch of our IT equipment this year, and I have to say I'm really excited about this project, in part because this was entirely the idea of a bunch of people on the staff that, like, it never would have occurred to me. And they were like, well, we're the Internet Society, how come we're not doing that? And I said, I don't know, that's a good question. And they said, well, it's because it's hard. And so the IT staff, they need to refresh a bunch of our stuff, and what they're going to do while they do it is write down how they did it and make videos about how they did it and try to explain to people on Stack Overflow and those kinds of places. This is how you do this if you're running a modern enterprise. You're a small, medium-sized enterprise, and you want to do this kind of stuff in a standards way that allows it to work well. This is how we did it. Doesn't mean that this is the only way to do it or anything like that, but this is the way that we did it. And that's really fundamentally the goal of this. Again, this is not a huge project, But I think it's an interesting project because what it does is it shows us eating our dog food. Next, please. So those were all projects about making the internet stronger. I should have pointed that out at the beginning. The next ones are about growing the internet. Next, please. So the first one, of course, is building community networks. And I think that it's important to recognize that we're having quite a lot of success here. And also that I genuinely believe this is one of the only ways to solve a bunch of those problems. The other thing about it is that, again, it's mutually supporting with the other things that we've talked about, like, for instance, the internet model of networking. Because what it does is it says, look, you build your network over there, and then we can connect it together. We can connect it together with other networks. That's the fundamental model of the way the internet works, and we have forgotten it because the internet is so ubiquitous to those of us who are widely connected. So, that's why the lowercase I in internet in popular press and so on, because people have forgotten how the network works. But this is the strategy, and therefore this is the way that we want to continue to try to help connect the unconnected. This continues to be an area where we need to work both on the acceptance of these things and also we need to work on measuring the effectiveness of connectivity. I was talking at the beginning about how we need to connect those who most need it. And so one of the things we need to do with these kinds of efforts is sort of try to decide, hey, this one really worked because it caught a lot of people in its catchment, whereas this other one, it was less successful because maybe the community didn't really want it or whatever. And as we learn how to identify those things, it allows us to build on the successes so that we can make more and more successes all the time, and so that these projects can learn from one another. So that's really fundamentally what these are about. Next, please. We're also, of course, going to continue to foster infrastructure and technical communities. This is closely related to the Internet Exchange Point project from 2019. This is where we will continue to collaborate with Facebook on building out of the IXPs. But one of the things that we noted about the IXP project was that people started to think of this as, oh, you're just building an IXP, as though like these things work in a vacuum. And so the critical thing we need to do here is, we recognize we needed to make part of this project be clearly about how you build the community there that maintains this thing once you've got the thing up and running. It's easy to drop, a $5,000 switch into a network point, and now you've got an internet exchange. It's hard to make sure that it's still working a year later, and that's the part that's actually the really critical piece. Because if you just drop it, you drop network equipment from the sky, it's not always that helpful. In fact, I think there was a movie about this, right? So so that's the idea here, that we're going to focus on these efforts that way. This is also where a lot of the training efforts are going to be found. Next, please. Now, to do all of this, we have to measure things. Measurement, sometimes people see this and they think that what's happening is you're trying to measure things in order to create competition and like kill things off. Sometimes people see a measurement as an attempt to gain a lot of data about people and suck it up and so on. But fundamentally, none of that is true. Fundamentally, if you want things to get better, you need to know how it starts, and then you need to know how it changes. That's what we need to do. On top of all of that, we have been struggling over the past year. I talked a little bit about this yesterday in our relationships with governments. We've been struggling in a number of cases with baseline data because you talk to various policymakers and so on, and they basically just don't believe you because they got nothing to work from. And there's actually a lot of measurement of the internet overall that's going on, but it's very difficult to get that stuff together. If you're not already a network nerd, you can't understand it. And so we have to we need to become a clearinghouse for that kind of information so that we can put things together, we can work with all of these partners that we have, and then we can say to people, whether they're governments, whether they're business people, whether they're civil society, it doesn't really matter. The goal is to make it clear to people, hey, look, this is ways in which the internet, these are ways in which the internet is succeeding. These are ways in which we're not doing so well and we can improve. This is what happens when you make this kind of change. Our consolidation efforts, the efforts that we talked about quite a bit during 2019, there was a lot of study around consolidation. One of the things we discovered over and over again was that there were a whole lot of myths about how this was working, and ways in which it was good and ways in which it was bad and so on. There were things that people said that if you went and looked at any numbers that you could find, they didn't seem to be supported at all, and yet it was something everybody knew. So the short answer here is we need, in fact, to have a way in which people can understand the internet and understand it real, so we can have fact-based discussions about how the internet works. Maybe not everybody in the world wants a fact-based discussion anymore, but I happen to think that that's really important, and I hope that you all do too. The thing that I will say is that we're not going to do the measurement here, right? We have a lot of partners who are already doing measurement. There's lots and lots of data sets out there, and we can work with all of those people, and it would be foolish to try to rebuild all of their infrastructure. We are the Internet Society, not the Internet Controlling Society. And our goal is to work with all of these people who are already doing this great work and promote their work in order to show it off and say, look all of this stuff, and you policymaker, or you private foundation or whatever, you could in fact improve these points of view if you wanted to fund these researchers and so on. So it gives the researchers an opportunity also to sort of promote themselves through us, thereby making the research community broader and better supported and so on. Next, please. Now, I think that this slide, as you can see, we want to work as a cohesive internet society as one. Perhaps over the last couple of days, we have sort of illustrated rather nicely why this is going to be super important. So this is one of the additional things that we really want to work on over the next year. Next, please. So we're going to continue with mission support projects. The Internet Hall of Fame, Wendy Cover is retiring at the end of this month. And so this is an opportunity to have a look at that project and see how it's been successful and the ways in which it worked pretty well. It's worth noting that we got an awful lot of quite good press out of that this year. And it drew people in to have a look at other projects that we were working. And in fact, I remember somebody coming up to me after that and saying, oh, I was looking at this thing in the Internet Hall of Fame, and I had no idea you were working on community networks. Well, that seems like a real opportunity to show off the way that we're doing this. And if we want to promote the internet model of networking to people, we got to engage them. So this is a project that we really can build upon, and we're going to have a look at that this year. Of course, we're going to continue with the John Postel Award. I think that goes without saying. We're going to continue also supporting NDSS, the research community that is working on the security and trustworthiness of the internet. This conference is really very successful. It's a place that that we continue to foster, and it's revenue neutral for us. So I think that we should obviously continue that work. It's a good conference. Next, please. We're going to change a little bit the way that we engage with the community. We really want to focus on improving chapter health and broaden the organization members. But the other thing we want to do here is focus not just on improving chapter health of the weakest chapters, but for instance, to address the issue that Olga mentioned yesterday, where strong chapters are getting a little bit overwhelmed by perhaps too much help. And we need actually to hook the chapters up so the more successful ones can help the less successful ones and teach one another. This is a community. It doesn't need to be, right? I mean, we don't actually operate our chapter system the way we think that the network works best. Instead, we operate it as a spoken hub model, as though we're some sort of giant, IBM mainframe in the middle of this thing. And so instead, what we need to do is make these informal connections better. Another thing that was actually quite interesting to me when I was talking to one of the chapter advisory council people in Montreal, and he said, well, this thing that we found valuable is not going to continue. Where's that going to go? And I said, well, if you found it valuable and you're a chapter and you're an independent organization and you've got some funding, why don't you continue working on it? And he said, oh, we can do that? He's like, this is the internet. There ain't no boss, and yet there was this worry that somehow it was not okay for chapters to act independently. Not all of our chapters have that view, but that was an interesting view that was being expressed by somebody who's quite engaged in our community. And so I thought, this is a case where we really need to strengthen that chapter model and remind people that part of the strength of the way we've done this is that the chapters are, strictly speaking, independent organizations that can, as long as we're aligned, we continue to remain one internet society, and yet, they can focus on local issues as well. Obviously, we're going to continue to work on our global and regional partners, and we're going to continue to try to make sure that the Internet Society's brand and sort of key messages across the organization resonate very effectively. Next, please. So in order to do that, next please, we're going to change the structure of the organization. And I already gave you a preview of this in Montreal, but this is the first time that we're talking about this in an open public session. So those of you who've already seen a little bit of this in preview, I'm sorry that you're going to have to hear it again. The basic ideas here are to reorganize the staff in a way to make it easier that the staff organization can collaborate within itself. So our prior arrangement, the arrangement that we've been working under this year, for instance, has these functional departments, and the functional departments are not really mapped very well to the projects that we're working on. And the reason they're not really mapped very well is because none of the projects that we're working on have only a public policy thing, or only a technological thing, or only a problem of global engagement. That none of them are that. Instead, they're all things that really need to involve the whole of the Internet Society. And that's as it should be, because if they were straightforward, narrow projects in that way, anybody could do it. But what we bring is this ability to work across technology and policy, to work everywhere in the world, to engage with the chapters, to have good partnerships, to engage with governments when that's appropriate, and in ways that it's appropriate. That's the key additional thing that the Internet Society does, and that only the Internet Society can bring to the Internet discussion. So that's the idea here. At the same time, we want to maximize the effectiveness of those projects. And the reason we want to do that is because we believe that those concrete actions are what's going to bring more people along in order to see that the Internet is the way to build networks around the world. So that's really the idea. There is an additional component to this, and that is, the Internet Society, our revenues are not growing and so on, and that means that the size of the organization shouldn't really get much bigger. Well, in internet corporations, normally you're growing or dying. That's kind of the way it works, and what that means is that there's lots of career opportunities for people and so on. But that's not really true with the Internet Society, because we're kind of a static organization. And so what we want to do is provide an environment for staff to grow and to learn things and so on, without always having to have ever expanding responsibilities of management and so on, because we can't do that. We're not that kind of organization, and what we need to be actually is more and more efficient, so that more and more of the funds that we spend go to making the internet better, rather than making the Internet Society bigger. So the critical idea here is that we want these things to scale really by inspiring the world, and that means that we're not going to turn into a bigger staff, and so we need to provide lots of flexibility within the career paths of the people who work here. Next, please. So this is a sort of stylized diagram of the way the org chart is going to work. And I recognize that it looks like it may have exploded, but that's really not the way this works. So in the fundamental idea here is that work should flow around the organization. The intelligence of the system, just like the intelligence of the internet, should be at the edges, should be on the outside of this thing. And that's where the stuff needs to get done. So you can think of this diagram as being the cardinal points of the compass. And the reason I use that is basically for ease of stable reference rather than anything else. If you want to call them, John, Paul, George, and Ringo instead, I don't object. There's lots of ways to name these things, but I have named them according to the cardinal points of the compass. So on this diagram, you can see the top right is marked northeast, the top left is marked northwest, The bottom left is marked southwest, and the bottom right is marked southeast. And I will talk about it in those terms as I talk about this diagram. So I don't want anybody to be mystified why I'm referring to the northeast or the southwest or whatever. In the northwest of this diagram, you can see we have internet growth and strong internet. Those are the two places where every project, every one of those projects that I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, where they live. Each project either lives in internet growth or strong internet. These are going to be headed by Jane Coffin and Joe Hall, who are both here. And their basic task here is to make those projects successful. Now, you might be asking, how do we get all of the people that are necessary in order to do that? Well, we're going to design this thing as though it's a consulting organization or a law firm or that kind of thing. The experts, the people who are going to do this work, live in the Northeast. The people who work on the projects live primarily in the Northeast here as subject matter experts, and it's like a pool of expertise. But just like at a big law firm, you have junior people in the pool and you have super senior experts in the pool, and you make decisions about how what people you need on any given project or any given case or whatever, based on the needs of that project in case. So it's like there's an internal economy here where the customers for the project are in the Northwest, and the providers for that expertise are in the Northeast. And this is led by the Office of the Project Staff, which is going to be headed by Sally Wentworth, who's also here. So fundamentally what we have is on the north side of this organization, we have a group of people who are responsible for delivering the projects that the Internet Society is doing. And everything that we're working on really should fall into those things that we're working on right now. Now, in order to do that, you can't just have a bunch of people who are working on projects, because that sounds like, that's an open source project with 3 developers. Instead, what we need is a large scale organization that supports this kind of effort. So this kind of effort has really serious expertise, and it has clear project goals, and it has people working together to do that. I'll stop hitting the microphone. In order to support all of that, the south side of this diagram provides the necessary functions which make the organization strong enough to deliver those results. So in the Southwest, you have business operations and the CFO and so on. Sandy Spector, the CFO, whom you'll be hearing from in a moment, is going to lead this group. And in here, you have sort of standard corporate support functions. Legal is here, corporate human resources is here, all the financial reporting and business systems, the IT staff are here. These are systems that fundamentally the organization needs because they're functions that every organization needs to provide. That's fundamentally the way this works. In the Southeast, we have the Office of Strategy, Communications, and Engagement. And these are functions that are supporting of the rest of the organization, but they're supporting in a different way. They're supporting in the way that the Internet Society works. So this is where our engagement with the rest of the world works. This is amazing to hear yourself like that. This is the way that we engage with external partners, the way we work with our chapters and the community. So we have external engagement here, and we have community engagement. Last year, these were sort of put together, and this year we've separated them because we found that the conjoining of them meant that they were. It was too hard to get both things to work well. So we wanted to place a renewed, separate emphasis on our own community as opposed to our engagement with the rest of the world. We also have here the corporate communications piece of this. So communications that are directly related to the projects and so on are going to be fed mostly out of the subject matter experts in the Northeast. But we also have a thing that is about the whole corporate story. What is the internet, and why do you have it, and so on. And that lives here. The communications aspect of our work really suffuses all of the things we do, and so we have staff in lots of parts of the organization. Planning and training and impact management and so on, impact measurement and so on. these all live in this portion of the organization chart as well. And as you can see, each one of these is a component of the way that we do things that makes it unusual compared to the way many organizations would do things. This office is going to be led by Renalia Abdul Rahim, whom I believe is online, but is not here with us today because she's going to the IGF in Berlin. And actually, the fact that she's going to the IGF and Olaf is going to the IGF and so on, and I am not, is another example of how this is supposed to work. We're supposed to diffuse the expertise and the capabilities throughout the organization so that no one person has to be the key thing that makes it work. You will note that I barely talked about my own role in this, and that's on purpose. If this works well, I will not be very important, and that's the goal. The goal is to make the organization function well, consistently, reliably on its own. It doesn't need constant corrections. It doesn't need constant twiddling with it, because the internet didn't scale that way, right? The internet scaled by growing well at the edges and working independently in these various parts and plugging together over reliable connections that you made because you know how to do it. So that's the goal of this organizational structure, that the organization functions well, that every single member of the staff knows what it is that they do today, knows what they're gonna, whom they're gonna have to rely on, and how they're going to make those connections, knows how to talk to the rest of the community, so that if, for instance, a project needs to engage with a bunch of chapters, they know, oh, I gotta go and talk to the chapter people over there, and then they're gonna come and help me. And then that function just continues to flow around the organization. The goal here really is to make an entire staff that all work together for the interests of the internet, combined with our whole community, all of the people on the internet who are interested in these things. So that is fundamentally the way we're going to do this. This is going to take effect at the all-staff meeting, which is happening right after the IGF in Amsterdam. That will be the official time when we switch the organizational model. And the staff have been apprised about this. We've been talking about it for months. I've been impressed at how little of it has been discussed widely on the internet, despite the fact that we have this big staff. I think people have been working hard. I will say that the staff have worked hard to absorb this. This is a big change. It's a big change to a way of working, and I know that it's been, sometimes alarming to a lot of people because it's not a very conventional way of working. But I believe it's the internet way of working, and I think that the internet way of working is the best way. I thank you for that. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. So, yeah, I mean, the board has been exposed to this information before, but it's good that we have it now in a public board meeting. I mean, as we have said, I mean, I think this I mean, it's certainly not conventional, but it's not anything, unheard of either. So there's several organizations working. And this is basically a way that organizations work well. So in that sense, it's good. Regarding the action plan, I mean, as I said before, the bottom-up way in which the projects have been built, I think that was greatly appreciated by the board as well, and I think this is a very different way to basically present everything. So as I said, I mean, I myself like it a lot. So I have a lot of questions here, so I'm gonna build a queue, and I saw Mike, Pepper, and Walid. And Sean, and if you give me a second, I'll do this. Online. No. So you guys get to ask questions, and so Mike, Pepper, Walid, Sean.
So hi. I think this was a great presentation, Andrew, and I have a couple of things that are not really questions as much as comments, or I hope contributions. One is that as I've been thinking about, the mission of Internet Society, and it's become particularly acute in the context of the discussion of the PIR sale generally, which is what is the Internet Society about? And for some subset of people, it was about .org, which seems crazy in light of the history and mission of ISOC. But so to the extent that we're talking about, the programmatic piece, that's actually really helpful to bring that front and center and say, this is the number one thing, or these are the number one things that we do. Oh, and by the way, historically, we also do this other thing, but maybe we're not going to do it. But it's really helpful, I think, to be very proactive in articulating the programmatic focus. With regard to the programmatic focus, my thought was there's actually a kind of an interesting bifurcation that I don't think you quite framed in this talk, but in the materials, but I think is there, which is that in terms of developing the internet, we're typically talking about developing countries, or we're talking about parts of the world where they don't have quite the internet connectivity that we would like them to have, or the recognition of the necessity of internet connectivity and internet technology and the internet way of doing things. So that's sort of a developing world prong of it. But in the developed world, that's where all this weird policy, all the policy fights are happening. And so, we have this bifurcation in our focus, where we have to focus on the developed world in particular to prevent bad policies from becoming reified as part of an EU consensus or a North American consensus or whatever in the developed world, and that takes a different, fundamentally distinct set of expertise and skill sets and so on. And so I think it's worth pointing out that there's that bifurcation between, we have to focus on the developed world and invest in public policy in the developed world, because that's what's creating the landscape for tomorrow that we're all going to live in. The second thought I had was with regard to the growth expectations for ISOC, reasonable expectations based on whatever money or income we expect to have. And we're not planning to grow. We want to be, we have no particular impulse to grow as we would if we were a private company. It occurred to me that in that context, we ought to be very proactive in creating the flexibility for those who work for ISOC, so that rather than talk about, promoting people or doing other things or building out opportunities, we also need to be very proactive about career development. And here the idea I had was that if we bring people into ISOC as employees or staff or contractors, and we help them along their career paths further along, so that they in fact create more opportunities for themselves, and that also is aligned with the Internet Society mission, because they can go forth into the rest of the world at some point and spread what they've learned at ISOC, and so propagate the ideals and work of ISOC in that way. So those are my comments that are meant to supplement and maybe help you in some way. And let me just underscore again, I think this focus is great.
Yeah, please, Andrew.
So thank you for that. I think you're exactly right in both cases, and I just want to make two quick points. The first is on the bifurcation thing. Actually, when we were thinking about this over the course of the year, that framing was in fact one of the things that put us in mind, because one of the ways that this got inspired was thinking about how we were going to readjust what is still to this day in the current org chart, the global engagement group. And the way we historically had done that was entirely by region, and yet it occurred to me on several occasions that our regional focus obscured as much as it showed, because there's more in common, for instance, between the communities that we go to with the Indigenous Connectivity Summit and places that are underserved in Africa and places that are underserved in Asia. There's more in common among them than there is, in fact, on their regional level, from the point of view of the network. Obviously, culturally and so on, they're very different. Sure. And similarly, there's much more in common between like Singapore, where we are right now, and Tokyo and Chicago in terms of the network than there are differences, despite the fact that culturally these are all very different places. And so that fact actually suggested to me that we had organized ourselves thinking regionally, and it was an overlay that didn't work perfectly. And so gradually this evolved into this idea of stronger and bigger, because it made it clear that actually you're quite right, that these are different kinds of problems, and yet they're mutually linked. So thank you for seeing that without me having made the point because it shows that we didn't lose our way completely. On the growth thing, I don't want to leave the impression that the Internet Society doesn't want to grow, as the Internet Society. I just don't think that the staff function is going to grow very much. But the Internet Society, I hope, is going to be poised for lots of growth. I want, in fact, more members, and I want to make sure that the chapters are healthier and attract more people and so on. That's part of our goal of bringing all of the world along.
So to be clear, I was focusing particularly on the staff growth issue.
Right.
And I agree with you about the other growth goals, of course.
Thank you, Mike. Pepper.
So you actually ended up covering one of the things. I think this is great. Having the overlay on the commonality of, especially, I love the framework of build, promote, and defend. We talked about that because when you're talking about, for example, the defending, the point that Mike makes and that you just made also is that the commonality, because it's the internet, right? It's not geographically based, right? So you look at or the growth, right? What Jane and company are doing in terms of IXPs. There's more in common with parts of Brazil and Africa than just keeping it regional. So I think that is actually great. The other thing that Gonzalo, you said this is not sort of a normal structure. It's not a normal structure for a corporation or a traditional company, but it is for, if you think about it as a consulting group model where you take resources and you use them. So I think this is all really good. The other thing that I really appreciate is this has been a heavy lift for you and the staff, and to do that at the same time as keeping everything in motion under the current plan, you've been able to do. So there's a real risk because of uncertainty and so on, especially among staff, that things get dropped. That really hasn't happened. I think that's been great. You may want to comment on that. I have one very simple question because when and that is, I agree completely about the measurement, the indicators as being sort of essential to everything. And I might have missed it. I didn't see where that fits into the north, east, south, and west. Where does the indicators fit? Is that subject matter experts, or is that and how are you going to sort of do that? Because there's a lot of data out there, as you point out. It's not consolidated. Some of it's crappy, some of it's good. I think having the Internet Society in effect become sort of the gold standard, not for creating the data, but actually sort of benchmarking it and as a single source of truth where people can come.
So thank you for that. You're quite right that this has been an enormous amount of work and effort to go through all of this, to learn how to do all of the work to build the plan for the next year and to see the long way out, and to do this year's work as well, and to go through this kind of transformation, and also to swallow the the potential funding changes, which I have to say was an enormous distraction for me, and the staff didn't know about, and so they all held up their end, and I think you're exactly right. None of that is attributable to me. The staff did this work, and they nearly killed themselves this year, and I just am so grateful for the amount of work that people have done with this. So it really has been a tremendous group effort, and it would have been impossible without a group of people nearly as devoted to the organization as this. So I really, I want to make that crystal clear. On the question of the of measurement and so on, there are two pieces to this. So one is the focus on individual measures and things that are going on and so on. And the projects are all defined in such a way that we have a number of project indicators and things that and those will be in fact in the dashboard that I showed you yesterday. And so that's how those projects are going to be measured. On the internet measurement project itself, the project is one of those projects that's living in the Northwest. All of those projects are, and the project there is to build this dashboard, to to work on the partnerships and so on. And it's a great example of how this structure can provide that function, and the structures that we had before won't really work at it, because it requires good work through the partnership development that people have to do, and that comes, of course, from the southeast in that diagram. But the people who are working on the project, they're working on this project, and they need to draw on those partners. They need to draw on the information that the chapters have, because people know what's going on in their region and so on. So that's actually a really good example of how working around the organization will allow us to provide a project that I think is of value to everyone.
And yeah, two things. Thanks, Pepper, for bringing this up, because I mean, as you obviously know, but I mean, like staff know, we had our board retreat this year in DC, and we gave like a very brief speech to staff, and that was basically what I said, and just to extend it to everyone, that we absolutely know that they have been super busy. We've been just kind of speeding ahead, and their support has been really great. So that work is greatly appreciated, and I have weekly calls with Andrew, so I'm very much aware of all the challenges and everything. And yeah, at some point we will have to slow down a bit, because I mean, like having peaks like that, that's okay, but you cannot be at this level all the time. So we are fully aware of that, and thanks for bringing it up. And the second one, just to clarify my comment about what Andrew said, was like, this structure is unconventional. I would just agreeing with that, but just saying that it's not unknown or unused even in corporate environments. So for example, our research is structured exactly like this. So in that sense, just to say that it's not like we are just, having a leap of faith and say, well, let's see. I mean, this is actually a tested system, and I'm sure that it's actually, a good match for what we are trying to do. So just, in case I was not clear, which probably I wasn't. Next was Walid.
Yes, I don't want to repeat the same praise, but nonetheless, it's really great work. And again, the staff has done remarkably well. Thank you for that. The notion of what you presented here is a lot about of course, why and what you're doing. But of course, the how question still lingers to me somehow a little bit, especially with the details on how this can be managed. For example, the sizes of staff, the budgets for each various line, and the diagram itself may not represent some aspects because it's all centrally linked to the office, but it might not be that way, obviously, because your workload might be less, hopefully, when it happens. So maybe a little bit about the how element and the iteration process. Let's say you switched on the new system, and now you started. Practically speaking, how would you assess whether the projects evolve and how they evolve, the pitfalls, how do you improvise, the perception, the branding issue as things move along, the older ways of thinking and working, how will you adjust to that? When do you have your emergency meetings to address certain issues? Maybe a little bit of that. And also the connection to the iStock Foundation, for example, in terms of the alignment, the direction of this. Do you have these in mind? I mean, how you do compensate for that as things change?
Yeah. So the how, and in particular the budget, is going to be presented to you next. Sandy is going to present that. So I don't want to get into that right now. The fundamental way that the project systems work is that we have defined these projects. We've got a bunch of KPIs. The tussle that I think delivered those KPIs was fascinating to watch, and sometimes to be asked to adjudicate. And it's been useful. But what has happened is there's been a bit of a crucible there that has given us a bunch of measures that we've agreed upon, and that clarity then allows us to say, okay, now you're working on this project, you organize how you want to do it, because it gives people then the ability to say, all we've had to do is agree about what we're going to do, and now the precise mechanisms by which you're going to do this in any one of these given projects should be dependent on the ways of working that work for the people who are trying to achieve that goal. And so one of the reasons that we're having the all staff in a week and a bit is precisely so that we can have people get together and do those kinds of things. We concluded that it was just easier to get everybody into one place than to try to do this retail. So we have people who are going to get together and they're going to collaborate and they're going to hammer this out, and they're going to write down the things that they're going to do in the first quarter. And all of this is coordinated through Sally's group, because there is this question. I mean, there are certain people around the Internet Society that everybody wants on their project because they're really super great. I mean, all of our staff are really super great, but certain people are super great, and so everybody's like, oh well, I really need that person on here. And part of the idea here is that people are going to need to negotiate that amongst themselves. This is partially in order to solve this problem that we were talking about before about the career development, right? That one of the critical skills here is to be able to figure out what are the negotiations and so on, and also for people on the staff to say, but wait a minute, I know something about that. I could contribute to that project. And so we actually have people bidding for things and saying, I would like to be involved in this. And then sometimes it's a difficult discussion because you're like, I don't think that you should be involved in this project. But most of the time it's instead like, I didn't know you could do that, or I didn't know you wanted to do that. And so there are these opportunities for people to involve themselves and to expose capabilities that they had that were hidden prior to this structure, where it's much easier to work outside of your lines. So, I mean, there will be a bunch of iterations. I completely agree with you. That's the reason that we need to have those sharp agreements on, what is it that we're going to be achieving and when are we going to be achieving them? Because that allows us to say, hey, is this working or not? And we need to be rigorous about that. There will be some painful conversations sometimes, just as we had a painful conversation last year about, the IoT project and whether we were having that success. And I think that, that's one of the responsibilities that you have given me, that I need to deliver those kinds of things. So that's my job. And sometimes I got to be the heavy, and sometimes I can be the praise man. I like being the praise man most. And it's easy because we've got a staff who are really dedicated in doing that. So I mean, I don't have a crisp answer for every project for you here, because some of that is going to be worked out in iteration itself. Oh yeah, sorry, the foundation thing. So yes, we the foundation in theory is running in parallel, right? But Sarah's goal is to align with this. And since we have this nice crisp set of things that we're working on, as opposed to like all of the things ever, it becomes easy to align the goals of the foundation without having to be closely tied to it. And that's a nice way of doing it, right? It's a kind of loose affiliation with the projects, because we've got this project written down.
Yeah, and that's also a good point that we also told Andrew, like guidelines we gave him some time ago, that it was, I mean, this exercise was not only about choosing what to do, but more importantly, what not to do. So in that sense, that focus, I think, is important, and maybe it's not so clear by just watching the presentation. So, I mean, this is the action plan. I know all trustees have comments and everything, but I will ask you to be concise, because, I mean, we are already behind schedule. I don't want to cut conversations, but, we don't have to be kind of, longer than needed either. So the next one was Sean, and then Hiroshi.
On that note, I'll drop some of these. But I will say that the messaging, I think, is crisper this time, because we went from 4 to 3, and we have single words that we can use. So it's easier for us and everyone else to remember. So I appreciate, however that happened. What was the thinking from going from 4 to 3, though? Was it the idea that 2 of them were just close enough that they were like defend, and so?
Yes.
I mean, that's enough, because I mean, I looked at the ones from last year. I'm like 4, and the 2 in the bottom are kind of the same. So maybe just put them together. Okay.
That's also how we got from build, promote, defend to bigger and stronger. Yeah. Right. That it turns out that if you operationalize these things, it turns out that they boil down nicely. And each time we do that, it's useful. And yet it's still useful to think about this as build, promote, defend, because they are distinct. At one point people were saying, what's the difference between promoting and defending? And I'm like, well, I mean, it seems pretty obvious that in some cases you have an active thing where they don't want it yet, whereas in other cases, and so those are differences, and yet they still do boil to the other.
Right. So we used to use the phrase campaigns, and we've gone to projects. Can we just use projects going forward, so that we some uniformity, as opposed to next year picking another term? I like the idea of these staff videos to show that we eat our own dog food. Are they going to have the blooper reel too, where they show where they blew it and it didn't work and they had to reconfigure stuff?
I think that's an excellent idea.
Because they will. I guess they just do, right? I mean, everybody does. I like the point about continuing NDSS. I think that it's not just good for the internet society, especially if it's neutral. It's actually good for the IETF because there are multiple research, groups. Or sorry, not groups, but at least symposiums where people have been able to publish papers, which helps them be able to do stuff, and that's great. To the staff point, are the people in the Northeast pool who are these subject matter experts, are they going to be full-time staff or like contractors? We can bring them on for a certain amount of time, and then when we're done, essentially their contract is up.
So everyone who is in the staff this year is full-time staff, and we're building this out of the staff that we have. The model that you're suggesting, however, is one of the things that we have in mind. And as things change within the staff, it's possible that one of the things we're going to do is along those lines, where we have experts who come and cycle in and out depending on what the expertise is.
Finally, to your point of trying to work your way out of a job, what's your plan then if this all works great? Are you going to evangelize and be able to go to things and?
Well, so yes, but look, it's not like there's nothing to do. This is a machine that we have just built, and a machine that you have just built requires some time to get working properly and so on. There's a lot. I mean, to Walid's point, right? There's a lot of iteration that's going to have to happen here, and some of this is iteration on how these things function. So I don't think that I'm going to be bored anytime soon. Don't worry. Well, I you should have started a year ago.
Thank you, Sean. It was Hiroshi and then John, or okay, so Hiroshi and then John.
Thank you. I really love the you use the word of the independence of the network. That is the you didn't explicitly describe in the document, or that is wholly whole of the story you mentioned is basically independency of the network and the users. So that's really good word, I believe. And also regarding the measurement, measuring the internet, I really concur with the paper's comment. We don't need ISOC doesn't need to measure itself. So we should be a kind of trustable data showing. That's same as I asked to the reference document regarding the policy or fact. We really want to show the real data that could be referenceable when we decide a policy. Actually, we successfully in Japan, we make a kind of idea about evidence-based policy making. That's top level government realize that thing. Then, important thing is a lot of government staff try to make their own data, right? Then we really want to show them that's wrong. That's a trustable data. That is a really important function that I certainly believe. Regarding the leading by example of open standards, I think that's really good in order to release the independency of end users. So you can say that is really especially younger people, tend to use the provider or depend on the provider, right? Though independence means they can build a network by themselves. So that is quite important. Also, the independent from the proprietary product or proprietary technology is another thing. So based on that, the last tweet at DTC, I asked to talk with the staff. They really want to try to a new system for the ISOC itself. Then that would be a very good referenceable system, be able to show to the ISOC world. So that's yet another you mentioned. ISOC itself is a reference, good example of best practice of the internet world. So that's really all of things could be in a conjunction with the story to making independent network of network and show the ISOC staff provide the best practice to the world.
Thank you, Hiroshi. That's very true about the data and about being an exemplary um, organization. So I didn't really get if you wanted to be in the queue or not. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, I hope this can be quick. Looking at the new org chart, it nothing personal, but it bears an uncomfortable resemblance to the org chart of the Court of the Sun King. And I realize that the blue boxes are intended to be strong middle managers who can sort of protect you from everybody else. But I'm wondering, do you have a concrete plan to, to keep this from killing yourself as everybody wants your help doing stuff? So actually, I feel pretty strongly that what we have in the leaders of these various areas are people who don't need me. On the north side of the organization, Joe and Sally and Jane, can work together on making those projects successful and on working out the ways that things need to work. And if they need my help, then I'm available to help with that. But fundamentally, that's their job, and I don't intend to interfere in it. Similarly, Sandy has built an organization of people for the operations side of the house that is really strong and can produce the pieces that we need. I believe that she has an incredible ability, astonishing ability, really, to function, and to juggle a whole lot of things at once. And she doesn't really need my help with a lot of that. And similarly, Renalia has a tremendous ability to define the goals, to set people up for success, and to get them to deliver on those things. And actually, she said something really nice in an executive retreat a little while ago. The facilitator who was with us, Debbie, asked, and what do you do when he's not available? She says, oh, I just ignore him. So I actually think that what we have in this team is a group of people who are really capable of depending on one another and working together and defining these things, hammering out, sometimes in admittedly, difficult discussions, hammering those things out together and then agreeing on it and writing those things down, being clear about what it is we're going to do. And I am, there really just to be a kind of counterweight in these various things. And every now and then I make a grumpy comment. So despite the fact that this looks like all towards the center, I recognize that that's one of the flaws of this diagram. Fundamental problem is if you're going to build a three-dimensional model on a two-dimensional plane, you're going to have a problem.
Another way to look at it, though, is if you're just a router in the middle and not dropping packets, right? So it's not it's a Sun King model; it's a routing model.
It sounds more like you have enough redundancy that even when you do drop the packets, you expect them to recover.
Yeah. As I said, I mean, we have talked about this model very often, and I've been working I don't know, for 20 years in such an organization. So I kind of understand what things can go wrong, and we've been talking about that. So I think Andrew has a pretty good idea of how to.
An ongoing issue is everybody loves the CEO to death, and it is important that you get some sleep.
Yeah. So just, two last comments to conclude this. So I sent some minor comments, and I think I was discussing with Greg at some point. As far as I can tell, the last version of the action plan doesn't address those comments. Is the idea that we approve the action plan without, they were minor comments, right? So we can approve them without being addressed, but I just want to be clear. So is the plan to approve it without addressing them, or you intend to address them somehow or at some point, or
it may be that I missed ones that weren't addressed, so we probably should follow up on that. Obviously the intention is to address all the comments.
Okay.
It is possible that something slipped through
Yeah, yeah.
my fishing net over the past couple of months. But so I'm sorry if that's the case. But our intention, of course, is to address the comments. Yes.
No, as I said, they were minors, so I would be completely okay. But just so that we don't drop the ball and understand that we are on the same page. Then one common theme that we have heard here and is like what happens after this, because it seems like we are trying to do everything at the same time. Diversifying the revenue of the organization, changing the structure, changing the CEO, everything. So in that sense, it's also good to understand that the turnover of the board is good to match it with what happens in organization, and this is what we are trying to do. So if you think about that, in 1.5 years we will have more than half of the board actually cycling off. So in that sense, I think it actually matches quite well with changing things, and then you need a period to stabilize, or as Walid is saying, to basically see what we are doing, fixing things. So in that sense, I think it fits quite nicely with that. So that when we have a fairly new board, while they are getting up to speed and deciding how to tackle their new goals and everything, at least we have a stable base to build from there. So from my perspective, I'm not concerned at all with this, like what happens next, because it's probably, if you think about not the role of this board, it will be the next board actually doing that in that sense. So that's the way I see it. Perfect. And then to finish, sorry about Zoom, because I couldn't see the slide properly. So to look at the small print, and for some reason, Zoom thinks it's a good idea to override the configuration of the operating system. So it started, just talking. So sorry about that. Excellent. Thanks a lot. We're gonna now, as usual, move to an executive session so that Sandy can present the finances that support this action plan, which is also important. And then we will have some discussions, and then we will be back to, so that, our treasurer, Richard, will basically, give the report, and then we will be ready to pass the resolution to approve all this. So roughly, these discussions is difficult to tell, but roughly we will be back online, let's say 45 minutes, something like that. And we'll take it from there. So thank you. We had our executive session where we were discussing the budget with Sandy. So now the next point in the agenda is point number 21, and Richard, our treasurer, is going to comment on what was presented.
Yeah, so in our executive session, we reviewed the budget as presented by our CFO, Sandy. I'd like to start by thanking Sandy and staff for their work in preparing this budget. It was a very thorough kind of top to bottom look at the organization's finances and how we need to arrange them to support our future work. That said, I think it strikes a very good balance between the change we need and ensuring continuity. So like I said, it was a very top to bottom rethink. It aligns with the action plan as Andrew presented earlier and points us in a good direction to have a clearer understanding of how our resources are being used to do good in the internet in the future. But it also, is, as I said, is balanced with continuity. So the overall evolution of the budget, the general shape of it is roughly of the same form as in prior years. And so it's easy for us as board members to understand how things are evolving going forward. So I think the Finance Committee reviewed this. We didn't have any substantial changes or comments on it, and so I enthusiastically recommend it to the board for approval.
Good, thank you, Richard. Any comments before we go into the resolution? Which is point number 22 on the agenda. Okay, then I need someone to move. So Hans-Peter moves and Pepper seconds. Okay, and as usual, we're gonna do a roll call because this decision involves money, and same procedure as yesterday. State your name and then your vote that can be yes, no, abstain. And we start with Mike and go in this direction. So Mike, whenever you're ready. On the mic. Mike, use the mic.
I'm Michael Wayne Godwin, and I vote yes on the resolution.
Glenn McKnight, yes.
Pepper, yes.
Olga, yes.
Sean, yes.
Richard, yes.
Gonzalo, yes.
John, yes. Hans-Peter, yes. Hiroshi, yes.
Lady, yes.
Mika, yes.
Okay, thank you. So the resolution passes unanimously. Okay, good. And yeah, let me extend the thanks to Sandy as well. I mean, she has done a really good job this time with many other things going on in parallel. Okay, so this actually, I mean, takes us to the end of the planned agenda, but we have a topic on, I mean, under any other business, which is that the IETF NOMCOM basically sent us the IAB slate, the proposed IAB slate. We want to thank the IETF NOMCOM because this has been extremely fast, much faster than other years. So I know they have been working very, very hard during the whole week, the IETF meeting that ended on Friday. So the idea is that we have put together a resolution basically to approve the slate. We discussed the slate in the executive session we had before, and you know, if you have any comments before going to the resolution, John.
I've mailed out the resolution so everybody can see what it is. And for anybody whose mail doesn't work, I can show it to you.
It's okay. Anyway, yeah, one point is that usually the NOMCOM, they want to announce, you know, the slates at a certain point. So we will not be disclosing the names at this point. We will pass the resolution, and then, you know, whenever the NOMCOM discloses, then we will see how to document that in the meeting minutes. So for remote participants, you know, we will not be disclosing the names at this point, just to be clear. So I will give trustees like 30 more seconds to look into the resolution before asking someone to move. Okay, I think we are ready. So I need someone to move. Richard moves, Olga seconds. And this one we're gonna, yeah, show of hands, guys. So we're gonna do a show of hands. So yes vote, no one abstain. So yes, it's yes votes, abstentions, no votes. So the resolution passes unanimously. Okay, thank you. So now opening this to any other business in addition to this topic. I see none. Okay, so before we adjourn, just please note that we will have a foundation meeting right after this. So we are just, you know, concluding the ISOC part of the meeting. So with that, I move to adjourn.